Hello students, welcome back. So in our video, we shall be we are still with module 2 and we shall be learning about the selection process. So as we see here, the selection process comprises of a total of 9 steps. So selection process sets in after recruitment gets over. See, the idea of recruitment over here is what? We are trying to gather as many candidate pool as possible to fill certain job vacancies. Once these candidate pools are obtained, these applicants are eventually put through a series of steps related to selection. So as and when the applicants cross each and every step, the total candidate pool, the total number of applicants eventually start reducing as each of these steps are crossed by. So by the time we complete the ninth step, we would have we would have reached only those number of candidates according to the number of job positions which are vacant in the organization. So if recruitment is a process which is trying to gather more and more number of pool of candidates to fill a possible position, selection is a process where we are trying to screen out those candidates and cut it down to a position where we are just having those number of candidates according to the number of job vacancies which are open with the company. So selection process basically deals with, yes, first you have job analysis, second point is recruitment. About job analysis and recruitment, we have already dealt with in detail in the past few videos. So now let's move on to the third point here. There is something known as preliminary screening. So what we understand by preliminary screening is the recruiter themselves, based on whatever data is given on the resume, they would have got a certain number of applications, or they would have scrolled through the Naukri websites and they would have understood a certain number of applicants to be contacted. So these candidates they will contact and will try to verify whether certain information given in the resume is true or not, or there may sometimes be some kind of information which has to be dug out from those applicants, from those candidates. It will not be given in the resume directly. See, for example, some organizations expect the candidate to have attended a full-time post-graduation program, or it should be a regular program what the candidate should have attended. Now, supposing this is the criteria, the recruiter can always call up the candidate and find out uh, whether their qualification is it by way of regular or is it by way of distance education. Now, supposing the candidate mentions that it's by way of distance education, then and there the recruiter can screen them out and concentrate on the other applicants. And there may be other situations also which are coming up. See, salary is again something which is not mentioned in the resume. So many companies have a standard where they would want to give a hike of like up to 40% or for 40 to 45% more than whatever salary they are currently drawing now. Now, in case the candidate is there in a certain position, but they are drawing too less a salary, and the company is offering a very high salary, in that situation also they may not want to take the candidate who's taking very lesser salary, because the hike may end up being somewhere close to even 100 to 200% also. So this situation companies would like to avoid. So even in this situation, the recruiters will understand what was the previous salary, based on which they will decide whether to accept the applicant and put them into the next round of selection, or whether they have to screen them out then and there. So this is one purpose which preliminary screening tends to serve for us. And yes, of course. And the recruiter can also ask other questions like what is the notice period that they are expected to serve in case the vacancy in the company in the upcoming job opening is has to be filled very quickly. And supposing the candidate says that they can be relieved only after a span of 2 or 3 months, so obviously such a candidate cannot be considered for filling up this job opening, which has to be filled as early as possible. So there also the recruiter can easily screen out the candidates. So this saves time and energy of the interviewers or the persons who are administering the tests, so that lesser number of candidates have to be dealt with in the future stages of the selection process. Now, moving on to the fourth point here, the fourth step in the selection process is tests. So regarding tests, there are different types of tests which can be administered on candidates. So it can be aptitude tests, it can be personality test. So all these types of tests we will just be seeing in the next slide. So as of now, we will quickly just go through the various steps involved in the selection process. Then interviews again. So this is also quite a lengthy topic, which will again be handled in a few more slides to come. Then have a look at the sixth point here. You have something known as background verification. So again, once the candidate qualifies the tests and qualifies the interviews also, many times companies face a problem where they have taken in candidates, but unfortunately those candidates, 20 to 25% of candidates, this statistics reveals in almost many of the companies, 20 to 25% of the candidates have given fake information in their resume. Their qualification might be fake. Their experience, many times fake information is given in the form of the experience that they have. Fake experience certificates, fake experience letters, all these things can be created, and lot of fabricated material tends to creep in to the resume of that candidate. So here, background verification, if it is properly done, can avoid all these problems. So the basic purpose of background verification, it mainly serves two main purposes. One purpose of background verification is to make sure that whatever information is given in the resume, is it authentic or not? Is it true or not? And another very important purpose of background verification is to unearth any kind of criminal records that this candidate might be holding. So which would prove to be very dangerous for the company in case they take in such a candidate. So there have been instances where candidates who have been booked under theft in the previous companies, and background verification has not been done properly, are taken into this company. So such candidates, when they are given big responsible positions like that of a cashier or like that of a manager of an office, obviously they can easily embezzle. They can steal a lot of the company's assets, company's cash, and they can also create fake documents, and they can easily conceal whatever mistakes they have done, which is going to cause a lot of loss for the company. There have been instances where startup firms have employed such kind of people, and because of the dishonesty of these candidates, these employees, the company has suffered a lot of losses and has got indebted a lot. Like they couldn't even repay their loans. So such kind of startups, such kind of companies have also been there. All these things can be avoided in case you do proper background verification. So background verification, how is it exactly done? So most of the times what happens is the employer, the new employer, by simple way of telephonic conversations, they will just call up the previous employer of that candidate and find out all details regarding that candidate, what job position he or she was holding, what is the salary that they were drawing, then what is the level of motivation and other things like, yes, levels of motivation, what is their, how good are their technical skills, how good are they in interacting with other people. All these details can be gained by way of simple telephonic conversations with the previous employer. And many times companies need to, during background verification, you might have to pay a certain attention to red flags that might come up. See, what might happen here is when you are asking the previous employer about how whether the previous employer will be willing to rehire the candidate. Supposing you ask such a question, and the previous employer is stammering over there, like they don't know what to answer. That is where you need to catch hold of such points and try to dig in further rather than just quickly moving on to the next point. So in such a situation, supposing you feel that the previous employer is faltering about answering whether they would like to rehire the candidate or not, you need to ask, what is the reason why this candidate has quit the job? So like that, things can get unearthed. And another very important information is there is also a scope for asking the referral. See, whoever the employee has referred for you to call up and find out about this employee, you can ask those people to refer other people. So you're calling up the previous employer based on whatever the candidate has given a contact or a telephone number. You're calling up the previous employer. You can ask that previous employer to refer other people with whom this candidate would have worked. So in this instance, you're calling up those people whom the candidate has not mentioned to us. There are chances where candidate might have spoken to the previous people, the previous employer, or anyone for that matter, and told them that yes, they will be getting a call from this company, tell good information about me. So such things is possible. Now, in case you call up a person who has not been mentioned by the candidate, this kind of fabrication is not possible. So then and then on the spot, the answer will be very objective, and the answer will be mostly it will be very truthful. So you can get very authentic information in this way. So this is another purpose behind which way in which background verification can be done. And it's also important to do background verification not only for new recruits. You can also do background verification for existing employees, also surprise verifications you can do. See, for example, a person is in a very responsible position with the company like a cashier. So you can always just check on his credit, his civil score, or the credit standing facility of the credit standing of that incumbent, the person who's holding that job, because he's handling so much of cash. In case he gets into some kind of defaults, or he gets into too much of loans, or it becomes too indebted, his civil score or something has come down, his credit standing has come down. In such situation, there is always a chance where he or she might embezzle some of the company's cash and use it for their personal purposes. So all this has to be ascertained. Then the seventh point goes to making the job offer a simple procedure. Normally, the offer letter and appointment letter tends to be different. Job offer will not have too many details regarding the terms and conditions of appointment and the roles and responsibilities. All those things may not be much. It will just mention that the position, what the person, it's just a letter which will mention the position for which the candidate is going to be appointed for, what is the date of joining going to be. All these details will just be mentioned in the offer letter. It will just be something about like 4 to 5 lines. Appointment letter, on the other hand, which is a little different from the job offer, will be something which is comprising of almost 2 or 3 pages also, which speaks about rules and regulations of the company, then other things like what roles and responsibility of the candidate. So it will be much more in detail compared to a job offer letter. And for the job offer, the acceptance of the acceptance of the candidate has to be done. Only once the acceptance of the candidate is done, other things can be carried forward. Then have a look at the 8th point given over here. You have something known as a medical examination. Obviously, a medical examination, it might be done before the offer letter is rolled out, or it might be done even after the offer letter is given, or it maybe even after the employee joins the company and starts work. So medical examination is done to test the employee for physical fitness. And another important reason why medical examination has to be done is it can form as a baseline for future compensation claims or insurance claims. See, supposing a person who's a heart patient joins the company, and unfortunately within, let's say, another 2 years or so, they pass away, they die. Now, and they may also claim that the death has happened because of working in the company, or because of being under stressful situations or something like this. So this gives room for the family members to make a compensation claim against the company. But however, if you conduct a medical examination prior to the joining itself, or in the early days of the employee starting work, they will have proper records and they will have proper baseline saying that, okay, this was a heart patient, and because of which the death is quite natural. It's not anything which is caused by the company. So you can cut down unnecessary expenditure or insurance or compensation claims, which you might end up spending too much if medical examination is not done properly. And yes, of course, we also need to find out whether the person is having any kind of communicable disease within them, so that they don't transmit it to the other employees. So for all these purposes, it's important to conduct a medical examination. Then finally, you have drug testing. So the purpose of drug testing is to ensure that the so employees, supposing they are joining the company and they are drug addicts, it will obviously reflect on the performance that they are giving towards the company. So their performance will be below standards. They probably for a certain time when the drug is working, they might be quite quick. But once the drugs also tend to have a lower, it tends to have a negative effect on the employee's performance. So their performance will be slow. There will be higher chances of absenteeism. More number of times they will keep absenting themselves from the company. There can be accidents which can happen. There can be situations where they can get extremely ferocious and they can start misbehaving with their fellow employees or with their supervisor. So all these problems can or with their manager. So all these problems can crop up. So it's not only drug testing, even medical examination also. The purpose is also to ensure that the candidates' absenteeism can get reduced. So those who are having inbuilt medical conditions or those who are having drug addicts will obviously may end up absenting themselves more. So all these problems can be avoided in case proper drug testing is also done. There are several ways in which drug testing can be done. Urine analysis is one. Then a sample of the hair. So hair sample is another way in which drug testing can be done. So yes, there are several methods which companies do adopt. Mostly drug testing is normally done in a kind of big MNCs. Smaller companies might not actually do this, but huge MNCs tend to, people tend to go through almost all these selection processes when they are uh, getting selected for the company's post. So let us have a look at the next topic here. As we had seen in the previous slide, we were trying to understand, test was one of the points under the selection process. Now tests, there are numerous types of tests that can be administered. So it's one of the selection techniques. So in your examination, in case they ask you what are the different types of selection techniques, these tests are one types of selection techniques and interviews are another types of selection techniques. So we will just go through each of these a little in detail. So have a look at the first point here. You have something known as achievement tests. So what we understand by achievement tests is it's a test which is trying to test the job knowledge of the candidate. What is their knowledge base they are trying to test? So you students, whenever you take up the university examinations or whenever you take up the internals which is conducted by the college, you're taking up an achievement test. So based on whatever knowledge you have learned throughout the semester or throughout through that particular 1 month or whatever it might be. So based on what knowledge you have gathered, the university is or the college is testing you based on written examinations. So this is one example of how achievement tests can come up. So in a similar way, candidates are also administered such kind of tests where they are trying to test them on the area of knowledge. See, for example, supposing a person is applying for a bank job. The kind of tests, questions which will come up in that is all bank related. They may ask them, what do you mean by an NPA or a non-performing asset? They may ask them, what do you mean by a statutory liquidity ratio? They may ask them, what do you mean by a cash reserve ratio? So these are some terminologies. What do you mean by Basel norms? So these are some topics based on which testing can be done. Supposing a person is applying for the position of, let us say, an accountant. So a test question might come up. What do you mean by assets and liabilities? A very simple question. Or what do you understand by fictitious assets? What do you understand by a double entry system? So if you can understand. So if you're getting the point here, based on what job post you're applying for, based on that, questions will be asked to just test your knowledge base. Now have a look at the second point here. Achievement tests can also be based on you're testing the abilities of the candidate. For example, supposing a person is applying for the position of a secretary, a secretarial position in a company, they will be asked to do some data entry job just to test them on their abilities on data entry. Or they will be tested on how well their typing speed is. So they are tested on another ability, which is their typing capability. So this is what is the purpose of achievement tests. Another type of tests, you have something known as aptitude tests, also known as cognitive tests. So this aptitude test can again come into fall under two categories. You have IQ and another type of aptitude test, which is specific cognitive abilities. IQ, it's generic. So what do you understand by IQ? Intelligence quotient. So intelligence quotient is where you're trying to test a person's memory. A person who has very good memory is considered to have a high IQ. You're trying to test the person's mathematical abilities. So people who are very extremely good at calculations are also considered to be having quite high levels of IQ. You will be testing them on vocabulary. Vocabulary is also a kind of a test on memory actually. You will be testing them on verbal fluency. All these things, verbal fluency, vocabulary, all these things eventually reflects how good is your IQ, reasoning capabilities. So all these things are a reflection of IQ. See, it's very interesting to note that these IQ tests are actually different from, you might have heard of IQ tests for children and for adults. IQ tests can manifest itself in two ways. If you're testing for children, it takes the form of a quotient. You have to divide one variable by another variable. So let us take, for example, you're trying to test the IQ of an 8-year-old child. So if you do so, you're dividing the child's mental age divided by the child's chronological age. So what do you understand by this mental age is, an 8-year-old child is exhibiting the intelligence level of a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. Now the chronological age of this child is 8. You have to calculate the time from they were born up to now. So based on that, the chronological age comes to 8. So in case you divide 10, that is their mental capabilities. They are capable of doing the tasks of a 10-year-old. So it is their mental capabilities, which is 10, divided by their chronological age, which is 8. So 10 by 8 into 100. You have to take it in the form of a percentage. So if you do that, you will be getting somewhere about 125. So from the point of view of children, anything above 100 appears to be a situation where they have very good IQ. Anything below 100, it may indicate a slightly lower IQ, which definitely there are chances where it can change once they grow up as adults also. So this is how it is calculated for children. But for calculating this IQ for adults, it's a slightly different. See, obviously for adults, you cannot do chronological age divided by, you cannot do mental age divided by chronological age. For those people who are quite old, in fact, the older you get, your memory tends to fail. You will not be as good at remembering things as how you were when you were a youngster. So in that case, it's just not going to work out. It will give you, in fact, negative results. Chronological, mentally, in case your age is 70, if you're just a 40-year-old person, it's not something that is good about. A 70-year-old person will have so many ailments. They might be having Alzheimer's. They will not be able to remember things. But that's not so the case of a 30-year-old or 40-year-old. So it is for this reason why this quotient will not be used for adults. Instead, for adults, a certain average would be arrived at. How many of people are above this average are considered to be having good IQ? How many people are below this average are considered to be having low IQ? So there are many techniques based on which this average can be arrived at. So that we will not look into too much. So basically, if you need to understand what is IQ, how good is their memory, how good is their reasoning ability, how good is their mathematical ability, all these things comes under IQ. Moving on to specific cognitive abilities. So specific cognitive abilities, IQ tests you on a general basis. Specific cognitive ability tests your reasoning, your numerical capability, vocabulary, verbal fluency, all these things on a subject knowledge, relating to a particular subject. See, I'll give you one example here. This is an aptitude test which is trying to test mechanical comprehension. So this can be administered to the basic mechanical comprehension this is. So this test can be administered to to candidates who want to apply for the post of, let's say, an entry-level mechanical engineer. So the question is simple. Which gear will turn the same way as the driver? So, I mean, it's not much relevant from our syllabus point of view, but just for your interest, in case you're interested in knowing, the answer is B. Because if the driver is turning it clockwise, this machine will make A go anti-clockwise and eventually B will move clockwise. So this is one way, this is one of the tests which is administered for a person who's applying for a mechanical engineer's entry-level position in a company. Then moving on to another, so till now we have completed with achievement tests and aptitude tests. Let us have a look at the third type of test. You have something known as test for motor and physical abilities. So the test for motor and physical abilities is trying to take up a dexterity on fingers test. How quick are you in moving your hands? How quick are you in moving your fingers? So manual dexterity. How quickly are you able to, and what is the, how is your reaction level? How quick are you to react to certain stimulants? So all these things, basically a test on your physical quickness, okay, and your motor skills. All these things are comes under test for motor and physical abilities. Obviously, a job like, let us say, supposing you're working in an assembly line, you're working in a production line. So let us say we are talking about a chips packet, so a production of chips. So what happens is you have the potatoes which gets into the machinery, and for which it gets fried or baked at very high temperatures. Eventually, that machinery will spill it over to a conveyor belt. In that conveyor belt, the chips are moving. So when it is moving in the conveyor belt, you have people who are standing near the conveyor belt to put those chips collect the chips from that conveyor belt and pack it and package it and keep it aside. Now, obviously, these people should be extremely quick in their hand movements. If they are not quick enough, there can be wastage here. So suppose there can be a lot of chips which are not picked up by these employees and put in the packets. Eventually, it will just keep moving into the conveyor belt, and again, a repetition of the process will have to happen. So obviously, it is required for us to hire people of very good dexterity skills. Dexterity means how quick they are in their hand movements. So while you're posting them in the assembly line or in the production line. Any job for that matter, even if you take the example of a tailor also, for a tailoring job also, you need a high level of dexterity. Because in case when you're operating those tailoring machines, in case you're not careful enough in quickly moving the cloth through that needle or maneuvering the cloth through that needle, you may either end up damaging your fingers, or you may end up damaging the cloth or the machinery altogether. So it's obviously needed even in such a job over here. Then moving on to the next type of test here, you have something known as personality tests. So regarding personality tests and the remaining type of tests, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.